The world of esports is a particularly interesting aspect of the gaming community. For those of you who don't know, esports are competitive video games played professionally and competitively by people with skill levels so high that it can sometimes be difficult to understand what exactly is happening. Esports takes the low stakes and often solitary hobby of playing video games and turns it into huge, high budget, international events where the best players from all over the world come together to compete in massive tournaments for millions of dollars in front of audiences large enough to overthrow governments. The very existence of esports stokes the competitive spirit of ordinary gamers, I hate that word, all over the world and results in the creation of massive communities that come together in arenas and convention halls to celebrate a hobby traditionally restricted to bedrooms and basements.
Playing behind the smoke, and there's the opening. As they come around the corner, they're not expecting him to still be aggressive. And he's gonna get all five! An ace for Chronicle! The round saved!
Now, he will try.
A man to the good here, Virtus Bro, but that is massive. What's next? He's walking around and just walking in a stacked wonderland. He's going to take a hat-trick of frags. He waited, and then he finished off the job.
To separate Nana. Oh no,
he rolled into it. That's a very, very, very expensive roll.
that look at him.
Paid with his life. All right, Nun's checking Twitter. Tweet at him.
Wow, my man is on social media right now.
Let's see what he sent out. I'm getting wobbled in my favorite game. What do I do?
Wow,
in real time.
Really?
In
oh
real
my
time.
God.
He definitely tweeted.
Chat, get hype. Let's go.
Tries to get him to the side. Oh my God! No 4P just defeat. Mars is going to take Genesis 7.
The dawning of a new king is upon us. The 4-peat denied. Mars standing at the top of the mountain.
Now, the esport that I, by far, have had the most interaction with, both as a spectator and a competitor, is For those of you who don't know, Smash is a fighting party game platformer hybrid with a star-studded cast of popular video game characters and a heavy emphasis on offering a more casual alternative to the more complex and competitive games that populate the fighting game genre. We'll talk about those other ones in a minute. Now, odds are, most of you are already relatively familiar with Smash, but what you might not be familiar with is this series' large and passionate competitive scene. Competitive Smash has been around ever since the first game on the N64, but it wasn't until Melee that the franchise really started to find its footing as a competitive game. For the first decade, competitors were playing at dinky little grassroots tournaments with consoles they brought from home, few to no publicly broadcasted games, and zero support from Nintendo. But despite all odds, the scene was still there, the community was intensely loyal, and the fan base never stopped growing. And today, Melee has a massive and widely popular competitive scene with world-famous players and several major tournaments a year, and it still doesn't have any support from Nintendo. Something Evo, something Five Gods of Melee. I personally am not really qualified to discuss the first decade of Melee's competitive scene in any meaningful capacity, because the game came out a year before I was born, so just go watch the documentary. I mean, That's what I did. Interestingly enough, Melee is still widely considered to be the best game in the series from a purely competitive standpoint, which makes a lot of sense when you consider that it is the fastest, most complex, and most intense that the series has ever been, and even after over 20 years and 3, technically 4, subsequent games, the Melee community is bigger and better than ever, and still finding new ways to grow, change, and evolve as a competitive scene. I mean, a Yoshi player just won a major tournament for the first time ever in Melee history because apparently the tier lists don't matter, so fuck it, I'm gonna play Dr. Mario and no one can stop me. Also, did you guys know that Pokefloats used to be legal? What the fuck? Of course, Melee isn't the only Smash game with a competitive scene. They tried to make one for Brawl, but players didn't really enjoy the game's more simplistic gameplay or the choice to include the devil himself. Smash 4 had a really good scene for a while despite being so slow that they had to create a new rule set to shorten matches, but the whole scene kinda went down the drain after the additions of Cloud and Bayonetta, and now we're on to Ultimate, the most recent game in the series and the biggest both in terms of the size of the game itself and its player base. Ultimate perfectly lends itself to the competitive scene with a diverse and mostly balanced roster, the most legal stages and viable characters in series history, and its ability to maintain a high skill ceiling despite its low barrier to entry. It's also the game that I am the most interested in playing competitively, but I never will because I'm lazy and bad at games. It was with Ultimate that Melee finally met its match, and now the two competitive scenes coexist as friendly rivals, inspiring one another to reach new heights and absolutely thriving despite Nintendo's best efforts. From a series of tiny little nothing tournaments to a massive esport with thousands of fans and 2 separate games being played simultaneously, Smash truly is one of the greatest esports success stories. Of course, it's not just Smash. Fighting games in general lend themselves incredibly well to the esports scene, thanks in no small part to their emphasis on single combat, insanely high skill ceiling, inherent accessibility as a spectator sport, and the passion of their fan bases. Between Street Fighter, Tekken, Mortal Kombat, Guilty Gear, Skullgirls, and a billion other games, it can sometimes feel like the very existence of a fighting game guarantees the creation of a dedicated competitive scene. Even them's fighting herds gets tournaments. Despite having a lot of shared DNA and design principles, every fighting game manages to bring something new to the table and carve out its own little niche. And with each game providing a diverse plethora of unique and interesting characters, playstyles, and mechanics, every match manages to be exciting. This diverse lineup of games, mechanics, playstyles, and players is the fighting game community's greatest strength, and no tournament better embodies this strength than EVO, the biggest and most iconic fighting game tournament in the world. A tournament that brings together players from all over the world and features many of the biggest fighting games like Street Fighter, Tekken, Mortal Kombat, Dragon Ball FighterZ, and Guilty Gear. EVO even used to feature Smash Ultimate and Melee, but now it doesn't. Thanks, Nintendo. Anyway, I love fighting games so much that I made an entirely different video full of more in-depth discussions of individual franchises, and with EVO 2023 fast approaching, I am getting very excited to once again judge top players for messing up combos that I am not even capable of attempting. MOBAs are undeniably the single largest genre of esports with genuinely massive tournaments, fan bases, and prize pools. For those of you who don't know what a MOBA is, the name stands for Multiplayer Online Battle Arena. And since that description is very unhelpful, I'm gonna give you a better one. Basically, just think League of Legends and you've got a pretty good picture. Despite the overwhelmingly bad reputation that inherently comes with being associated with League in any capacity, MOBAs have still managed to garner massive worldwide success, with games like Dota 2 and League of Legends amassing genuinely insane prize pools and fan bases, thanks in no small part to their inherent appeal as a spectator sport and their massive appeal in Asian countries. Especially South Korea, a country which not only deserves a massive amount of credit for the creation and cultivation of modern esports, but also has a disproportionately large esports scene featuring world-famous talent in games like Dota, League, PUBG, and StarCraft. Esports is such a massive part of South Korea's culture and economy that a South Korean politician recently faced intense national scrutiny for cheating at League of Legends, a criminal offense that is punishable with massive fines and literal jail time. Now, I don't really want to get political in this video specifically, but I still feel like I have to say, what the fuck? Tetris as an esport is really funny to me because of how much they overcomplicate what is otherwise a very simple game. The average Tetris player might understand how to stack blocks and clear lines because that is really all you need to know, while the slightly more advanced Tetris player might be familiar with terms like T-spin and Alexei Pajitnov and, oh my gosh, you're like so good at Tetris, will you please have sex with me? I hear that one a lot. Meanwhile, professional Tetris players will usually use more advanced terms like long bar dependency and backrolling and defaulting on my mortgage, because from what I understand, Tetris tournaments usually don't pay out the same Mr. Krabs money bags that the rest of the industry has grown accustomed to. As far as I know, the first ever official Tetris tournament was the Nintendo World Championship Power Fest, which was a 3-game event where players would compete to see who could beat Super Mario Bros. And Rad Racer the fastest, and then rack up the highest score in a game of Tetris. A lot of people also consider this to be one of the first esports events ever, as well as the premature birth of speedrunning, which is a concept we will be discussing later in the video. Nowadays, the majority of the competitive Tetris community is an incredibly tight-knit and grassroots-dependent scene with events that see people from all over the world flying hundreds of miles to hang out with the 300 people they met on Discord and compete to see who can last the longest and get the highest scores. It's all very cool and perhaps the single greatest argument for video games as a communal experience. Here in the United States, our esports of choice tend to be team-based first-person shooters. That means Counter-Strike, Call of Duty, Halo, Rainbow, Valorant, Apex, TF2, Overwatch. Every once in a while, a game like Fortnite or Splatoon will make headlines, but for the most part, well, Hideo Kojima said it best when he said, "Americans are great fans of the first-person shooter, and only cool, smart Japanese people like my late epic video games." Basically, if the game goes pew-pew, the camera angle is a POV, you've got 3 to 7 other people picking up your slack, and the fanbase just finished 4th grade, it's safe to assume that your favorite first-person shooter is now an esport. That's mean. I'm sorry. The team-based aspect of many of the most popular first-person shooters, as well as the previously mentioned MOBAs, results in esports that reward efficient teamwork, creative and intelligent strategy, and clear communication. First-person shooters are incredibly popular in America, partially because we like to adhere to our own stereotypes, but mostly because it's arguably one of the most accessible subsections of esports. Partially because it's relatively self-explanatory. I mean, no one's looking at a game of CSGO and saying, "How are they doing that?" But also because basically anyone can get into first-person shooters. They don't really require the average player to understand a ton of tech, frame data, or matchup knowledge, and half the time they have comprehensive competitive modes built directly into the game. And sure, sometimes developers place too much focus on building a competitive scene and cause the game to stagnate, but for the most part, competitive modes add a more intense but highly accessible alternative for casual fans who want to play at a higher skill level and can arguably be a gateway to esports. The inherent accessibility of first-person shooters means that the average player can just pick up a controller, or a mouse and keyboard if their parents love them, and play the game with some level of competency. Obviously, this doesn't mean that greasy-fingered, snot-nosed Lil Timmy who chews on his Joy-Cons and racks up the world's funniest KDA in Team Deathmatch is gonna be the next Shiro or Smurf, but first-person shooters are so easy to understand and accessible to play that it isn't exactly hard to make him feel like he already is. And I feel like that, as well as the sheer excitement of seeing a team of incredibly skilled people work their asses off to dominate their competitors, is what draws people to first-person shooters as an esport. Now, let's take a quick break from the traditional idea of esports to discuss speedrunning. For those of you who aren't familiar with the concept of speedrunning, it basically boils down to whoosh, woo, zoom, zoom, zoom! The whole idea comes from the age-old tradition of gamers looking at games that usually take hours, days, or even weeks to beat and saying, what if I beat that in 6 seconds and 5 of those seconds were spent setting up the live stream? Just to give a couple of examples, the average playthrough of Mario Odyssey takes about 12 hours, while the current world record speedrun took less than 1 hour. Doom 2016 also takes about 12 hours, and people are beating it in under 17 minutes. The average Dark Souls playthrough is estimated at about 42 hours, while the current top run takes about 21 minutes. Terraria is a 98-hour game with a sub-hour speedrun, and Ocarina of Time usually takes about 27 hours, and the current world record is 3 minutes and 50 seconds. The point is, speedrunners are a downright insane breed of monster with inhuman skills and an addiction to making Sonic the Hedgehog look like the little bitch he is. In the average speedrun, anything and everything is fair game. The best speedruns often feature glitches, exploits, clipping through walls, obscure game knowledge, and most importantly, pure, raw, unadulterated skill. Each game's runs are often split into individual categories based on what methods and techniques are used over the course of the run, but regardless of what game you're playing or how you choose to run it, as long as you've got that little timer in the corner, a single uninterrupted run, and an addiction to whiplash, you're speedrunning. Speedrunning is a particularly interesting form of esports because of its unique focus on single-player games, its deceptively low barrier to entry, and its players' unmatched ability to turn any game into a competitive experience while building massive and tight-knit communities around games that they would otherwise be playing alone. Yeah, okay, I'm gonna make a video on speedrunning. Now, Pokemon is a particularly interesting esport, partially because I'm pretty sure it's the only RPG with a competitive multiplayer mode, but also because of the sheer amount of work you have to do just to get your foot in the door. Competitive Pokemon takes the world's easiest dumb stupid baby game for dumb stupid babies and turns it into a total nightmare. On top of the absolute grind required to get good enough to play any game at a professional level, competitive Pokemon also requires you to work your ass off to get your Pokemon to the right level, teach them the right moves, hatch 500 million eggs to get the right nature's abilities and hidden stats, and fight the same wild Pokemon 80 bajillion times to power up the right IVs. It is absolutely fucked up. And even then, one misplay, one bad matchup, or one unlucky random miss or critical hit, and suddenly all that hard work is for nothing. And even if you do manage to win a bunch of matches, there is still no guarantee that you'll actually have any fun because half the viable Pokemon are brick walls, everyone is running some dumbass gimmick strat, stall is a viable mechanic, and a lot of the coolest Pokemon are banned or useless. That being said, it is still really fun to watch, requires a downright insane amount of strategy and game knowledge, and is one of the most unique esports out there. Of course, there are other esports worth discussing, both as entire genres and as individual games. StarCraft, Rocket League, Splatoon, card games, sports games, battle royales. I have even seen people setting up Mario Party tournaments. The world of esports is way bigger and way crazier than I could possibly describe in a single video. I mean, I didn't even mention the massive scenes in Japan, China, Europe, or the Philippines, which apparently also has a budding esports scene. And to be honest, I kinda just wanted to talk about the games, genres, and scenes that I personally find interesting. Anyway, if you're at all interested in esports but don't really know where to start, well, there really isn't a wrong way to get into it, unless you want to try something stupid like joining EVO for your first tournament ever. Personally, I'd recommend trying to figure out what games you'd think you'd have the most fun playing competitively, or watching some tournament if you're only interested in participating as a spectator. If you want to jump straight into it but don't know about tournament locations or just straight up aren't good at the game, there are tons of guides and tutorials online for how to find tournaments and get better at your favorite games, many of which are made by actual professional players, both retired and current. A lot of high schools and colleges also have esports clubs, and you can always try to look around online to see if there are any tournaments in your area. And if there aren't, you can always try to start one. I mean, really, what do you have to lose other than your life, dignity, self-respect, and reputation? The point is, it's good to have hobbies, and a lot of those hobbies can be a lot more fun when you share them with other people. And sure, nothing's stopping you from doing that with the friends you already play games with or just playing games online, but think about how many more people you could share your hobbies with if you joined a competitive scene. I don't know. I just personally really like esports, and I think that having a community for your hobbies is very cool. But what do I know? I've only ever been to the one tournament, and I got eliminated in the first round.